I'm Jenna Miscavige. I was born and raised in Scientology. I left when I was 21 years old and wrote a book about it. My uncle, David Miscavige, is the leader of Scientology, and this is my YouTube channel. Hey guys, I'm back home now, and I'm all settled in and nice and cozy, and there's something that has been on my mind the last couple days that I wanted to share with you all and this community, and that has to do with the subject of telling your story to the media. I have been talking to the media about my Scientology story since about 2007, and so that's about 18 years now. And I have learned a lot of hard lessons in that time. And even when I think I've learned this lesson, I have to relearn it again. I put my trust in somebody who winds up breaking my trust. And this actually happened recently. And so I thought this would be a good time to share a few stories about the pitfalls of sharing your story with the media. Because I believe that we all, ex-Scientologists, ex-cult members, anybody, should be careful who we give our story to. And often the media outlet who is asking for your story, they are acting as if they are doing you a favor by telling your story, when in fact, they are being paid for your story. They are making money off of your story. They are getting all of the advantages and none of the risks. And they are counting on the fact that you have been groomed to martyr yourself for a cause, and that you just feel so lucky and desperate to be heard for once in your life, that you wind up taking on all of the risk and getting none of the benefit for telling your story. So I'm going to give you some examples of some red flags from media companies, and then I'm going to go into why these are issues. The first thing is if they make you believe that you have to tell your story, or if you believe that you have to tell your story for the cause. All manner of evils are committed under the guise of it's best for the cause. And growing up in Scientology, we were taught to sacrifice ourselves in so many ways, our families, our sleep, our health for the cause. And so you're groomed to think in this way. And so if you think you need to tell your story for the cause, it is preying on that thought process that you may not even know that you're carrying over into the anti-Scientology or anti-cult sphere. And when I say you're taking on all of the risks, what I mean by that is that Scientology can and often will go after you. They will likely make a website about you, as they have with many former members, telling lies about you, bad-mouthing you. And so you're taking on that risk. They could sue you. There could be other repercussions for you, like your entire family will disconnect from you now that you've spoken out about Scientology. You will also be reliving your own past and trauma, which can put you into a vulnerable emotional state. You're taking time off of work, away from your family, in order to tell this story. So none of these things mean that you shouldn't do it, but I'm listing them because they are risks and work that you are taking on. And if you aren't getting paid, if they aren't paying for your travel expenses, if they aren't paying for your therapy, if they aren't protecting you legally, these are the risks that you take on when participating in any show or media outlet or anything like that, that you may not realize. And that's why I want to bring them to your attention, because you are not getting the upside that they are getting. In fact, they may be able to just blame you if Scientology says that you said something untrue, and you are then taking on all of the legal responsibility. Another red flag is when people say you will not be paid for your time that you take away from work and your family for this story because it compromises the truthfulness of the story. I have heard this time and time again, but then have later found out that other people on a show or a story are getting paid millions of dollars. And so it's easy for people to say tropes like that, but it is in their best interest. And it may even be true. It may be a real reason. It may be a real concern for the show. But that's something you have to realize, is that everybody else on the show is making money on it. People don't do things for free unless you're an ex-cult member, pretty much, unless you've been groomed to do things for free your entire life. No production company, no catering company for the show, no director, no video editor. None of these people are doing anything for free. They're getting paid. And you're the one who had to live that experience, and you're the one who has to tell your story. Why should they get paid and you don't? Especially when you're taking on, once again, all of the risk. Another really big red flag, and this one happened to me recently, is when people say you should have to pay your travel cost to be on the show. So recently, a large YouTube channel reached out to me and they said, "We'd love to have you on our show. Let's have a chat." The first red flag was that I made time to talk to this person and they were 7 minutes late for the Zoom meeting. And I had my kids waiting outside, waiting for me to take them to the beach, and a bunch of other stuff that I really had to be doing. Now, 7 minutes isn't a big deal, but it is disrespectful. Next, in the middle of the call, the person said, "Do you mind if I record? And this, by the way, is an audition tape." And I was shocked by this because I had no intention of auditioning to be on the show. I've been on so many other shows, podcasts, or whatever that were happy to be able to tell my story, that were grateful. And these people sort of thought that I should compete to be on this show. It was something where I would have had to travel to LA, and they said, "Well, we'll give you a $50 stipend." Well, it cost me $50 to drive up to LA, not to mention 2 hours there, 2 hours back, 5 hours for the show, rearranging my whole schedule. And these people were acting like, "Yes, you made it through. We want you on the show. You're so lucky." When the truth is that they are lucky to have me on the show. They are making money off of my story. I am gaining absolutely nothing from being on the show. I have the opportunity to tell my story every day on my own YouTube channel, in my own book, etc. I don't need them. They need me. And them not having that humility and that respect and that gratefulness that somebody would be willing to open up to them and give them their time for free. It has taken me a long time to realize this, but that is not the right attitude to have. It's not actually the way that it is. One of the first hard lessons I learned was back in 2007 when I appeared on ABC Nightline. Now, I had only left Scientology 1 year before. And if you know a little bit about my story in Scientology, you will know that I had almost no time off my entire life. I had never had a vacation except once in my entire life up to this point. And now that I was out of Scientology, I had a regular job. I had 1 week paid vacation. And I decided that I was going to use that paid vacation, the only paid vacation I'd had in my life up to this point, and dedicate it to filming for this ABC Nightline show. I thought that it was the right thing to do for the cause. I thought that it was the right thing to do to expose Scientology. And I'm still not saying it isn't, but I'm making a point here. I spent an entire week filming for this show. My ex-husband also took time off work to film for the show, and I essentially rearranged my whole life around it. I spent hours every day in a hotel room pouring my guts out to somebody, to the person who I was speaking to, who was a wonderful lady who was absolutely in tears. But I felt like this was a really important thing for me to do. I felt like my story wasn't just about me. It was about the many other people who had been through the same things that I had been through, who would not have their stories picked up by mainstream media, who may never be heard, especially at that time when Scientology was so litigious. And I feel like the tide hadn't fully turned where people really understood how much of an evil, destructive organization Scientology was. And once the filming was done, the show took quite a long time to have everything go through legal and final edits and all sorts of things, gathering information, gathering documentation from me. I mean, it took months. It took months longer than I expected it to, which frankly is kind of like months of torture. So not only did this personally mess with my mind and use up all of my paid time off, but also Scientology got wind of this, and my ex-husband and I were being followed by private investigators the entire time while we were waiting for the show to come out. Now, this is a direct result of having participated in that show. But were any of the producers or people who interviewed me or people at ABC Nightline being followed? No. Just me, just my ex-husband. Scientology was constantly putting pressure on my in-laws to stop the show from happening, to the point where 2 high-level executives of Scientology flew down in a helicopter to meet us at Denny's in the middle of the night and tried to convince us with my in-laws to stop the show. It was harassment. I did not have any desire to be back in touch with these people who, frankly, had abused me my entire childhood. But I felt like I had to do it because Scientology putting this pressure on was threatening my ex-husband's relationship with his own parent. Months went by. When the story finally came out, it basically included a pretty short segment with me talking about how much I didn't like hauling rocks. Now, I admit I don't like hauling rocks, but that really misses the point of the 40 hours of heavy manual labor we did as children at a Scientology boarding school, in addition to not living in a home with our parents, in addition to not having an education, and so on. It was very reductive, and it wasn't even 1/1,000,000th of what I said. Yet that's all that was featured. What they gave a lot more time to was Scientology's response to them, which was basically saying how much I was a horrible person and all the bad things I'd done. Now, for me to have been put through the ringer for months waiting for this story to come out, and me thinking that it would be worth it because it would tell such an important story for so many people, and then having this be the result, that was a really tough pill to swallow. And I remember calling the producer in tears when it came out, saying that I can't believe this is all that was published about it. And she said, "Oh no, I feel so bad. I'm out with my friends celebrating because the story finally came out." Now, this is nothing against her. At the time, Scientology was so litigious that it was a miracle that any story got out. But I'm just telling this to give an example of your story brings in views and income for those people, and they can go out and party and get promoted for it. Another great example of this is the Aftermath show. Nobody who participated in this show and told their stories was paid a cent, while Leah Remini made millions, literal millions, and Mike Rinder was also paid on the show. This is the reason why I refused to participate in the Aftermath show, because the idea of me pouring my heart out, reliving all of my past, taking on all of the legal risks that the show producers made very clear that they were not offering any protection for. Nobody who appeared on the show was given any protection from Scientology's hate websites that they put up on the internet about every single person who participated. They were not given therapy. They were not compensated for their time. Now, that doesn't mean that it wasn't worth it to many of those people, but the point I'm trying to make is that ex-cult members are a vulnerable population, and they are susceptible to sacrifice and give up things that they shouldn't for a cause. And so that's why I am sort of making this video as a type of warning to make sure that people are taking these things into account and are valuing themselves and their story. Because in the end, without those people's stories, that show doesn't happen. The stories and the individuals who appeared on the show are the real value and are the real money maker for that show. And anyone who says otherwise has it backwards. Now, I've also had many very good experiences. To contrast this, I think of my book and my publishers and how they took such good care of me every step of the way. If something came up legally with Scientology, they had me covered under their insurance. And they said that they would help to protect me to the best that they can in my contract. They paid me for my book. When I was speaking to media, they had somebody there who would make sure that I wouldn't get asked inappropriate questions, somebody who would look after me, somebody who helped me practice the key points that I needed to say. They took care of my family. They brought them out with me so that I didn't have to spend time away from them. They paid for my meals while I was doing my book tour. They treated me like family, and they treated my entire family like family and with respect, and they valued me. I feel so grateful that I was able to have such wonderful relationships and that I still am with the people involved in publishing my book. And they never ever made it feel like I should be so grateful to them and that they were doing me a huge favor. The opposite. Now, to contrast this, during the time when I was in New York on my book tour, I was getting entitled, rude, and borderline abusive emails from Tony Ortega, who was insisting that I was fucking him over by not letting him break the story of my book. This is despite the fact that I was going to be on The View, on Anderson Cooper, on radio stations across the world. He was so entitled to my story, and even though I had been up all night before needing to appear on television the next day because my daughter was sick, she was throwing up, I had other family things going on. My parents were getting divorced at the time. I had to hold a whole birthday party for my son the day before we left for New York. There was a polar vortex happening in New York. He was so pushy and so rude and so entitled about me sharing my story with him and making time for him, and being so angry that he did not get an advance copy of my book when it was forbidden by my publisher, that I left the whole situation just feeling frankly gross. Now, at the time, I thought that I was doing something wrong. I thought that I owed Tony Ortega my story for the cause, and that if I didn't let him break my story, then I was hurting the cause in some way and hurting him personally. When the truth is that Tony didn't have to sacrifice anything for my story. I owed him nothing. But I guess because he was reporting on Scientology, I felt like he was a friend and that it was the least I owed him. An idea that was pretty rudely dispelled when my ex-husband and I made a trip to New York and asked Tony if he wanted to meet us for a drink. And when he finally showed up, he basically said, "Okay, what's the story?" And we said, "No, there's no story. We were just saying hi because we were in town." And he was so angry that he had come, a few blocks to spend time with us, to get a drink with us, because he thought that it was some big story we were breaking to him. That was the first time I realized that this person doesn't have my best interests at heart. He's just out for himself. And this isn't even something that's particular to him. The thing that I'm trying to impart is that the media and people make money on your story. And so people are going to behave in this way. They are going to be opportunistic. They benefit from you not knowing your true value. And so I'm just trying to show some of my own pitfalls that I learned from, that took me having a lot of bad experiences in order to finally get the hang of it, or so I thought. So in early 2023, I was approached by an Australian producer, Bryan Seymour, and he told me that there was a special project he was working on and he wanted me to be involved. But I couldn't find out what it was until I signed this release, which basically said I would pay a bunch of money if I ever spoke about it. So I completely ignored his email because I'm not interested in that kind of contract. In about June, me and my ex-husband first separated and we were getting a divorce. And somebody came into my life who was in my life when I was a little kid, is an ex-Scientologist, and she told me that she was going to be a part of this show. And she told me that it was something that was going to be produced by Netflix and that she really wanted me to be a part of it. And I said that there was no way I was going to sign a release that said I was going to pay a bunch of money if I talked about it. And I also said I don't really have any reason to do it. I'm not going to take the time away from my kids or my family to participate in this. And she basically said that they would probably bring my family out to Australia. And so I was like, okay, that's actually a great deal. We can have a good time in Sydney the day before filming, the day after filming. And so after a bunch of negotiating on this contract with clauses that I felt were not in my best interest in any way whatsoever, finally I agreed to participate in the project. And they brought me and my 2 kids out to Australia for a few days while we filmed for this Netflix produced show. Now, it's my understanding that Bryan felt like this was going to be the highlight of his career. He wanted to once and for all answer the question of how can people stay in cults? And this was a big deal for his career, and he was being paid by Netflix or the production company in order to produce this. And his big value to the show was that he could bring in ex-Scientologists because he knew many of them. So me and my kids did have a great time in Australia, and everyone on the crew was kind and respectful, except there were a few things that I considered odd during the time of filming. And one of them was that Bryan was asking me, how do you feel about Mike Rinder? How do you feel about Leah Remini? And I was under the impression that I was there to tell my story, not to say how I felt about certain ex-members. And not only that, when they ask you questions as part of the show, they say like, how do you feel about Mike Rinder? And they require you to say, how I feel about Mike Rinder is blah, 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 blah. And so they make it sound like it's something that you wanted to talk about. This is pretty standard, but it also has very much been used against me in a way that's really weird in the past. Like someone will say, how do you feel about Tom Cruise? And then I'll be like, how I feel about Tom Cruise is this, that, and the other thing. And it will make it look like in the interview that I brought up Tom Cruise, somebody who I've never met. And it almost gives this vibe of like clout chasing or trying to associate myself with a celebrity. Now, in the case of Mike Rinder or Leah Remini, I obviously wasn't trying to clout chase, that's not the concern I had with it. It was more that it made it sound like I wanted to talk about these things. I wanted to say how great these people were when that was not the case. I was put on the spot. I had no idea that was going to happen. Now, before I did this show, I did not even know that SPTV existed. I had no clue. I didn't know that ex-Scientologists were telling their own stories on their own channels on YouTube. I was kind of living under a rock. I had no idea. Now, after I responded to these questions about Mike and Leah, which I responded to in a nice way because I didn't have any interest in bad-mouthing them, and after I was asked to express my opinion on these people, I was then given copies of the documents by Bryan Seymour that Mike Rinder had kept on his laptop and not shown to me previously. I had received some of these documents from Mark Headley, another ex-Scientologist, but the ones that Bryan showed me at the time were ones I had not yet seen, that were basically exposing things that Mike Rinder had done behind the scenes to separate me from my husband while in Scientology. Things that I had directly asked Mike about when I was writing my book, that he acted like he could barely remember at the time. Finding out that he had all of these documents, and so many of them being about me, was a big deal for me. After the show was done, me and my kids went back home. Over the next 6 months, many things occurred that turned out to be huge red flags. One of these red flags was that the person who had convinced me to go on the show, my friend, an ex-Scientologist, kept telling me how she could essentially control who did and did not participate on the show because she was the main one they wanted on the show. She told me that she did not want the Jane Does from the Danny Masterson case to be a part of the show in any way, shape, or form, because they were just spoiled rich girls who had been harmed once and didn't have to grow up in Scientology the way we all did. And they didn't have a real story of abuse in Scientology the way that she did. And so she would tell me how she would hold over the producers on the show, that if they were in any way participating in the show, that she would not be a part of it. Now, I knew nothing about the Danny Masterson case at the time. I hadn't even heard of it, to be honest, until she mentioned it. And I did not know either of the Jane Does. And so I knew nothing about what went on. And I trusted my friend at that time. She also was adamant that Mark and Claire Headley played no part in the show because she didn't like them for whatever reason. Again, I didn't know anything about the ex-Scientology community. I walked in and this person was somebody who I trusted, and she told me everything that I knew about it at the time. And so her word to me was like, She also told me that Bryan was so abrasive with Leah Remini that she had to convince her to stay on and be part of the show, and that Bryan owed her for that. She was also obsessively pursuing a man on the show who was in a committed relationship with somebody who had a child and was actively trying to have another child with his partner. And she was actively pursuing him in an obsessive way, despite him turning down her advances. And now I never knew if this was something that he was doing that was inappropriate or if it was all in her mind. When Bryan Seymour found out that she was talking with this man, he allegedly, this is based on what she said, became enraged. And then she went on a campaign to sort of get him in trouble and have him reported to the higher up producers so that basically he couldn't come between her and this man on the show. Also, another thing that I noticed after filming was completed was that I didn't really hear from Bryan anymore about updates, what was going on with the show. It was almost like he had my story and didn't really care about the love bombing after that. And there were some concerns, some things that I had said that were very personal stories. One was actually about sexual abuse that I decided that I no longer wanted to have in the show. I had also started my own YouTube channel, which my friend had told me that Bryan was enraged about. He had basically told her that he felt like because they flew me and my kids out, that I owed them some sort of exclusivity, which was never ever part of the deal. I don't know everything about myself. You never know until it comes down to it. But the one thing I do know is that I would never in a million years agree, no matter how much money anybody offered me, to not speak about Scientology. And the reason why I wouldn't agree to that is because it is a promise that I know I could never, ever, ever keep. And so this vibe of Bryan kind of acting like I owed him something other than what I had already given in addition to my story, and that he owned me, was gross to me and extremely off-putting. Then many things happened in the ex-Scientology world where some of the former executives who had also partaken in the show did some things rather publicly that I felt were extremely wrong. And I felt like they were reenacting their Scientology behavior in a way that I had always been wary of. And I was extremely disappointed in and uncomfortable now with being associated with those people. Additionally, in that time, I learned a lot more about the Danny Masterson case and the Jane Does, and hearing their stories completely broke my heart. And the fact that I had participated in a show where the person controlling who partook and who didn't was actively working on a campaign to badmouth these women and not give them every opportunity they deserve to tell their story, it made me sick. There were a few times when I tried to get on the phone with Bryan about this so that I could address my concerns, and he flat out refused to get on the phone with me. This was about a year ago. It wasn't until I threatened to go over his head to the producers that he finally agreed to call me. Since that time a year ago, I have received 0 updates from Bryan. I have no idea what's happening with the show, and so I told him privately that I no longer wanted to be a participant in the show. I was no longer comfortable associating with that scene and those people, and to please let me know that I would not be a participant in the show any longer. Bryan ignored this message for a week. Now, I don't have the phone numbers for any other Netflix producers or anyone else who might have the authority to let me know that my wishes would be respected. I only have the number of one other person on the show, which is the man who was involved with my friend. So I sent the message to him when I didn't hear from Bryan for a week. When I finally did hear from Bryan, he completely ignored everything I said in my message. He did not acknowledge that I no longer wanted to be a participant in the show. He said, "I'm sorry you're no longer in a friendship with this person." He completely ignored all of my concerns. I pointed this out to him, and now I still have yet to hear back from him. Now, the point is that this is somebody who I really trusted. This is somebody who I thought would do right by me because he had done other good stories about Scientology in the past. And I honestly think he went into this whole thing with good intentions, but still with the intentions of forwarding his own career. But in the end, people who are in the media, who are looking to build their own career off of your stories, they are going to look out for themselves and their best interests. And if that means silencing you, gatekeeping you, ignoring your concerns, in many cases, that is exactly what they will do. Now, there are plenty wonderful examples of this not being the case. The amount of podcasts I've been on in the past year that have shown me the utmost respect and kindness and have been so respectful and been so grateful for me to tell their stories on their show is the type of thing that restores my faith in humanity. But the reason why I'm telling this story is because I want to make sure that you know the value of your story and to never be convinced by anybody that you owe them your story, and to be careful of the risks that you're taking on to tell this story. Make sure that you're looking out for yourself, because many ex-cult members, many people who have been in abusive relationships or have difficult life stories to tell, they are used to being taken advantage of. So I'm here to tell you that your story has value. You are important. You are the main event that other people need in order to make money. So make sure you're not ignoring red flags. And of course, us telling our story in the name of the cause is a great thing, but do not do it at your own personal expense. It is not worth it. This is honestly one of the things that is so amazing about so many ex-Scientologists being on YouTube. People have the ability to tell their stories to people who will listen without somebody in between benefiting off of it. That's huge. That's huge for me. That's why I have my channel. It is so empowering. This is how the media world works. And there are bad eggs and there are good eggs, and there are people who are in between who also are just looking out for themselves. So I hope this serves as a helpful guide or warning or whatever you want to call it to those of you who have stories to tell and who want to be heard. All right, you guys, that's all I've got today. And thank you so much for creating and participating in the opportunity that I have here to tell my own story without any go-between or anybody else who is looking to profit off of it in any way. That gives me power where I have felt powerless in the past. So thank you so much. I'm incredibly grateful. And I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you again tomorrow. All right, bye. As of June 24, 2025, I finally received a response from Bryan Seymour after multiple messages asking to be removed from the show. His reply once again ignored my actual request. He did not acknowledge my withdrawal, made no effort to contact higher-ups about honoring it, and made no effort to get on the phone with me. Instead, he sent me a copy of the release I signed in 2023, a move that felt more like a veiled legal threat than a genuine conversation. That release states that I agreed to participate in the production without payment and gave the producers the right to use my interview, name, voice, and story in any media worldwide forever. It also says I can't talk publicly about the show, the production, or my experience without written permission, and if I do, I could be sued for breach of contract. Any disputes must go to private arbitration in New York. So while Bryan hasn't explicitly said he'll include me in the final show, he also hasn't confirmed that he'll remove me. Everything in his response suggests he intends to go forward regardless of my clearly stated boundaries, demonstrating beyond reasonable doubt that his personal ambition and financial interests take precedence over protecting survivors from being exploited.